This is a podcast by The Straits Times.
Hello, I'm Andre Yeo, Deputy News Editor for The Straits Times.
And I'm Jessie Lim, a journalist with The Straits Times.
And I'm David Sun, a correspondent with The Straits Times.
You're listening to the 5th episode in a new podcast series by The Straits Times called Stop Scams. Since 2016, victims have lost more than $1 billion to scams. In this episode, we are speaking with Mr. Willis Lim, Director of the National Cyber Threat Analysis Centre. The centre is the Research and Analysis Division within the Cyber Security Agency, which oversees Singapore's cyber security strategy, operations, and education efforts. Thanks for joining us, Willis.
Thanks, Andre. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Please tell us what the National Cyber Threat Analysis Centre does.
Thanks, Andre. National Cyber Threat Analysis Centre, or NCTAC for short, is the research division of the Cybersecurity Agency. Now, NCTAC looks at a number of cybersecurity threats that are prominent within Singapore cyberspace. These will be threats such as phishing, ransomware attacks, DDoS attacks, web defacement, hacktivism activities, and we investigate some of the key trends that are driving some of these malicious activities, and we also come up with some key learnings and implications for the country as a whole, as well as the public, on how to deal with them better.
And we're just curious, how does the work that the Cyber Security Agency do, how does it protect the public against scams?
Well, there are a number of trusts that the Cybersecurity Agency undertakes. Well, first of all, CSA is the national lead for all cybersecurity matters in the government. In addition to responding to all manner of cyber incidents, we also carry out various cyber education programs. We also try to raise the level of awareness of cybersecurity threats amongst the public. We also work together with a number of our international partners to raise the level of cybersecurity, not just within Singapore, but also regionally as well. Because really, cybersecurity, if you think about it, is a global team sport. And the threats come from everywhere and anywhere. And in cybersecurity, the world has no borders. We are all interconnected. Threats reach you extremely quickly. Usual geographical boundaries do not apply. And that's why we say that international cooperation is really one of the key facets behind cybersecurity and effective cybersecurity.
And who are some of these international partners that you work with?
There will be the computer emergency response teams of various countries. Today, SingCERT, or Singapore Computer Emergency Response Team, has of the CSA very good relationships with the CERTs of other countries. And this enables us to quickly respond to incidents when they originate from other countries, or when incidents are happening to organizations in other countries as well.
When did scams appear on the CSA's radar and your centre's radar?
That's a very good question. So in 2015, when CSA was formed, scams was already a big deal. Of course, there were a number, like you mentioned earlier. I think millions of dollars were being lost to all a variety of scams every year. But when CSA was formed back in 2015, what we did back then was to take an active monitoring, one of the key ways or avenues in which scams occur. That is through phishing. So I mentioned a number of cyber malicious activities earlier, such as ransomware attacks, website defacements, etc., etc. But phishing is always a means to an end. So cyber criminals or scammers would usually use phishing as an intermediate step to gain an ultimate objective. The objective will, of course, very much depend on what the scammer's key ultimate objective is. But usually, it is to gain access to one of your online accounts and, of course, carry out all manner of fraudulent transactions.
Willis, perhaps you can explain a bit more about an example of phishing and, how somebody can fall for such a thing.
When it comes to phishing, I really think that there are two key factors. One is more of an internal factor, which is our individual mindsets. And the second will be more of an external factor, which is the scammers' tactics. So let me deal with the scammers' tactics first. So what I've been seeing over the past decade is evolution and a constant improvement in the way scammers or cyber criminals conduct their phishing attacks. So phishing preys on a range of human emotions, such as fear, greed, curiosity. But by far, the most effective way is the sense of anxiety or a sense of urgency. So these are all very strong human emotions that move the heart first before the head. So while we may already know that these are the common tactics, right, that scammers use, our emotions still get the better of us sometimes. And that's exactly what the scammers are hoping for. These phishing scams that we will encounter could, for example, be those too good to be true deals that we see pop up on the web pages or on social media accounts that we think that it'll be terrible for us if we missed out on. Or ironically, they could even be emails or SMSs warning us that our accounts have been compromised by hackers and that we need to quickly log in to take urgent action, so to block off their access. I think the phishing attempts today nowadays are no longer those poorly worded or poorly spelled messages, right? Or those very suspicious looking badly photoshopped websites that we see in yesteryear. So I think phishing attacks today can be extremely convincing. They are almost identical to the genuine articles out there. And they even adopt the same kinds of corporate language that organizations use. So all the scammers need for their schemes to succeed, right, is a moment of carelessness or unattentiveness from the victims. And really, it can happen to any of us. So back to the first factor, which is where our mindsets are concerned, though. I think generally a large part of it boils down to complacency. In the CSA's 2020 National Cybersecurity Awareness Survey, we found out that 4 in 10 respondents to the survey have been affected in some way by cyber incident in the past. What was troubling to us was that even though there was an increasing concern about scams and about phishing, most respondents continued to feel that it would not happen to them. Now, as cyber criminals are coming up with increasingly convincing methods of phishing, we must also build up our instincts in the digital domain. So to take a physical world analogy, it's like crossing the road. Before we cross the road, we've always been taught to check our surroundings, look left, look right, make sure there are no cars or motorcycles around before we do so. So this is exactly what we need to do in cyberspace as well. We need to check left and check right and look around our surroundings before we click on any links or visit any websites. The moment where we fail to do so, the moment where we are inattentive or careless, this is exactly what the scammers are hoping for and exploit.
So what kind of information are the scammers after, and how can, even the seemingly smaller bits of information be useful for the scammers and actually trap you in a scam?
In cases like this, the more information a scammer has about an individual, the more convincing their scam or their phishing attempt will be. So when you combine highly sensitive information like name, but together with IC numbers, mobile phone numbers, addresses, email addresses, all these can give them a fairly good picture of what you are like, what your preferences are. So, for instance, you can receive an email message, supposedly from a bank, claiming that your bank account had been hacked and that you need to log into this using this link to address the problem. And you may dismiss it. But what if you were to also receive an SMS telling you exactly the same message? Then you will start to have doubts. You start thinking, hey, no way lah. No way, how can they reach out? How can a scammer reach out to me using 2 particular communication methods, right? Maybe something really is wrong here. Maybe I should really log in and take a look. And that's exactly when they succeed. So when they combine pieces of information about you, and they can really derive this information from everywhere, including what you post on social media online, they will have a fairly good idea of what you are, and they will have a better idea of which are the avenues or the platforms to use to target you.
So, Willis, I've always been curious, where do people even find these personal details? You mentioned social media. I'm not sure whether there are other means that scammers employ to seize control of these details.
That's a very good question. There are a number of ways which scammers use to get your information. I will summarize these as the 3 Ds for short. So the first D stands for data breach. And sometimes scammers or cyber criminals can steal your information from the databases of organizations that they hack, sometimes without even the organizations knowing themselves. Or, like what David mentioned earlier, they can purchase the information of a marketing databases that are put on sale, that have been stolen online or in the underground forums. So the second D stands for dumpster diving. Cyber criminals or scammers could get their hands on very poorly disposed of documents, and these tend to be documents that carry a lot of personal information, such as your utilities bills and your phone bills, for instance. Just the other day, I saw my mom just throw one of my older phone bills that I really should have disposed of properly, but she threw it in the rubbish bin. And if you look at the phone bill, though, it carries your name, your address, what sort of line and what sort of contract that you have applied to. And that is a very rich kind of database for a scammer to construct a cheating attempt against you. So yes, please dispose of all these important personal documents very carefully.
So what did you tell your mother when you saw what she was doing?
I told her, Mom, please hand those documents back to me and just don't throw them down the rubbish chute. But I know it's impractical for everyone to get a personal shredder or install a shredder at home. But we can consider other ways of disposing of them rather than to just throw them wholesale down the rubbish bin. So the last D stands simply for digging online. And there's a lot of information that we post online nowadays on our social media accounts, our Facebook, LinkedIn, and even our TikTok. And just browsing through them, if we have not set our accounts to private, right, can give cyber criminals or scammers a fairly good idea of what some of our preferences are and some of our personal information that we are sharing openly.
What are some of the trends concerning scams has the Cybersecurity Agency noticed recently?
So before we get into that, let me just explain that there are usually a number of categories of organizations that cybercriminals like to spoof. That means like to impersonate. So the first category is what I would call the evergreen targets. And these tend to be your large social networking or tech firms. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, LinkedIn, these would all fall into this particular category. Now, the second category are what I would call the local organizations. These tend to be your large local enterprises, service providers such as Singtel, DBS, your telcos, your banks, or even government agencies and other service providers. Now, for each of the evergreen targets or the local targets, the scammers will usually craft a variety of phishing emails using lures, such as undelivered parcels or a problem with your banking account, to try to hook you into surrendering your information to them. Now, there's a third category that we saw with some regularity back during the COVID pandemic era last 2 years. And these really focus on developments rather than organizations. So whatever is salient and making news headlines. So for example, the scammers can write on an announcement that the government will be disbursing COVID-19 relief packages to help out the public. And they will target people with a fake registration page to ask people to fill in their information, etc. There are some worrying developments, however. So previously, no matter which category, the phishing schemes were largely indiscriminate, which is to say that the scammers would randomly target a large group of people, regardless of whether they knew whether these were actually customers of the impersonated organization or not, and hope that some of the people actually fell for it. So this is a tactic that we should nickname spray and pray. From this, we can see why that the tech organizations and the larger organizations tend to be preferred spoofing targets, because there's a reasonable chance that whoever received their phishing message would already be a customer of the organization, and then the entire message would seem fairly relevant to them. The worrisome trend is that what we've seen recently, such as for the OCBC phishing scam, is that the cybercriminals are somehow able to focus their phishing attempts on actual customers of the bank itself, which is to say, the majority of people who received the phishing messages were either actual customers or ex-customers of the bank. Now, this is a far more dangerous tactic since it is less likely to raise suspicions. For example, let's say you're not even a client of ABC Bank, and if you receive an email from ABC Bank telling you that your account had been compromised, you will know for sure this is an attempt to scam you, and then you might even raise the alarm. So, by going after actual customers themselves, the scammers are less likely to rouse suspicions. And second, they have a higher chance of catching the victims off guard, especially when they combine it with other techniques, such as a very convincing looking website or as well as a SMS message. So this does demonstrate a very worrisome and a very dangerous leveling up of the capabilities of scammers and cybercriminals.
So Willis, how would the scammers know that these people are customers of OCBC?
So investigations are still ongoing. CSA, the security agencies, as well as relevant parties are still investigating this particular issue. But in general, there are a number of ways in which scammers can go after like particular customers of an organization. So the first, of course, is what I mentioned earlier. You'll be through data breaches. And nowadays, it may not be just through data breaches of the organization itself. Now, we have seen organizations outsource a number of their functions to managed service providers, or what we call MSPs for short. They could also have outsourced certain functions to like third-party vendors. And sometimes, while the organization themselves are very well protected, have strong cybersecurity defenses, their vendors may not have the same level of cyber hygiene. So these are the weak links in the armor and in the chain, right, that cyber criminals would sometimes target instead of the organization itself. Some other ways would be through what I mentioned earlier, like dumpster diving, get profiles of the targets that they are going after, or just in general going after like certain community pages, for instance. For example, on social media, we see a number of community pages going after that have a particular interest groups or hobbies. They can be fairly sure that these members of this group will all have a certain likes and dislikes and preferences. So these are the ways in which they can like carry out more focused and more targeted attacks against particular individuals.
Find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or via the Google Voice Assistant and Amazon Alexa-enabled devices.
And now, back to my conversation with my co-hosts, Andre Yeo and David Sun, and our guest, Mr. Willis Lim, Director of the National Cyber Threat Analysis Centre. So Willis, it's very interesting how you mentioned community groups as well as even your phone bill, right, could be used against you. Can you tell us about a specific case that maybe your team handled? Will you be able to say, how did they get scammed? How much money they may have lost in the process?
I think thousands of scams or phishing attempts are reported to both Singapore Police Force as well as SingCert every year. So maybe let me just relate a couple of them. And I think I will choose those that are relevant to and close to Singaporeans' hearts. So the first case was involved online shopping. There was a member of public who went online to purchase a pair of sneakers. And he went to this site that he didn't know, but it was offering an unbeatable discount. And he spent a couple of $100 purchasing this very rare pair of sneakers from this supposed website of a sportswear brand. So he was in the process of keying in his credit card number when he suddenly had a realization that this was probably all too good to be true. And then he stopped himself halfway. Now, the second one is an activity that's close to all our hearts, which is going on holidays, especially with travel restrictions easing. So a member of public wanted to take a holiday in the upcoming June holidays, and he wanted to visit Australia. So he visited his usual website to apply for a visa. For some reason, that website was down. So instead, he Googled Australian visa, and then he came across a website that he was unfamiliar with, but he thought was pretty high on the list of search results that was returned to him. So he clicked on that, and he applied for an Australian visa through that particular website, paid about $40 for it, and several weeks later, he still hadn't received any visa. And that's when he realized that it could have been a scam website, and he reported it to SingCert. Our advice to him then was that he should cancel his credit card and contact his credit card company and monitor for any suspicious transactions. So online shopping and going on holidays can really be considered Singaporeans' national pastimes. And with the June holidays coming and with travel restrictions easing, right, we should always try to ascertain, these are authentic and genuine websites before we offer up any of our financial or personal information.
So Willis, can you tell us, what an individual can do when their data has been leaked online through a leaked database?
Yes. So, unfortunately, there really isn't anything much that we can do except to change our passwords and contact our suppliers and service providers as soon as possible. Now, that will limit the damage that scammers could do with our information. Now, some other practices to prevent a recurrence of data hack, for example, include enabling two-factor authentication. If not already done so. I think two-factor authentication is traditionally sent through as an SMS, but nowadays, biometric authentication through our smart devices. It's a far more secure manner of doing so. So additionally, if the revealed password is also used on your other accounts, I know some people who would love to use the same password through all their accounts, change those too. When creating a new password, please be sure to use a different password for each of your online accounts. The CSA has a number of useful tips in the creation of a good password. A good password should ideally, and I say this ideally, consist of about 12 characters and a combination of uppercase and lowercase, as well as special characters and numbers. I know you have a look on your face already, and it's fairly tedious, I know that. So I think we will want to consider using passphrases instead. So a passphrase can be drawn from a unique memory that only you yourself would know of. For example, I went to makan at 7 a.m. If you string that together with the upper and lower case and with a full stop or punctuation mark here and there, it will make it a much harder passphrase to crack. And adding in colloquial phrases such as Singlish would make it far more difficult and far more costly for a hacker to try to penetrate your password or compromise your password, so to speak. When hackers try to crack our passwords through a method where we call brute force attacks, it is usually running all the words that are found in a dictionary and against your password and hoping that one of them actually turns out and they strike the jackpot. So by adding in Singlish, for instance, makan, right, which cannot be found in most dictionaries, it makes it almost impossible for the hacker to try to compromise your password. So other good practices would include installing good antivirus on your smart device, running regular scans, and things like that.
For the rest of 2022, what are some of the scams of concern that the Cybersecurity Agency has identified and why?
So there are a number of scams that are out there at the moment, but I think the tech support scam is really one of the most enduring techniques, right, that scammers love to target victims with. The whole premise of this scam is that, hey, look, you got a problem with your computer or your device, and lucky for you, I'm here to help you solve it. Tech support scam is really popular because, unlike other scams, it allows scammers to actually install software or computer malware programs on the victim's devices. So once you're able to do that, you can do a lot of other bad things. So there are usually two main methods in which the tech support scam can occur. So in the first method, victims will receive a pop-up alert or even an embedded advertisement while using a computer visiting a particular website. And the message usually claims that the computer has been compromised or infected and include instructions for the owners to contact an organization such as Microsoft for assistance. Very helpful of them, right? The number provided will also usually appear as variants carrying a +65 prefix. They do this in the hopes to lead victims to think that this is a valid local help desk number. Now, victims who call this number provided will then speak to the scammers, impersonating tech support personnel. Now, in the second method, the victims will receive an unsolicited phone call from scammers who will claim that they are working for internet service providers or a telco. And they will claim that the victims' Wi-Fi was not working well or had been compromised by hackers, and they were calling to assist in resolving the issue. They could even pretend to be from Singapore Police Force or even CSA and send you a fake verification email to prove their identities. There are a number of variations of these scams, but the premise is always, look, you got a problem and we are here to help you out. Now, once they establish contact, the scammers will then usually request that you download a remote access program, such as TeamViewer, UltraViewer, or AnyDesk. Now, these are legitimate software and programs used by actual tech support teams. But they are also very powerful programs, and they let people see, and they even execute a number of commands on your computer. And they can do things like install malware or spyware, for instance. Now, once they install these remote access programs, they will do a number of things. Under the pretext of helping you, of trying to find out what's wrong with your computer, or trying to get the hacker out of your system, etc. But what they're really doing in this case is to snoop around, look for sensitive information, or they could download further malware or programs into your computer so that they can continue to establish this persistent access to your system long after this phone call has ended. Now, after they have gone through this entire show and tell of telling you that they have helped you fix your problem, they will usually request payment for their services. Or they could also request that you log in to your online banking accounts so that they could see if everything was working fine now. Now, should the victim prove uncooperative, the scammers may then threaten to lock the victims out of their computer or leak information that they have stolen using the malware they had installed earlier. Or they could even threaten to delete programs or documents that are essential to the victim's computer until the latter paid up.
Yeah, it sounds really very scary, Willis. I mean, if I was locked out of my account, I think I would feel very threatened to pay up, and that would just let the scammer access your accounts, your bank accounts. So if something like this happens, what advice would you give to victims of such tech support scams, and how does the cybersecurity agency help them?
If you have given scammers info or access to your device, you should take some immediate steps. I think it goes without saying that you should try to uninstall any software that scammers had asked you to. Next thing you should probably do is log off your account and turn off your computer to limit any further activities that the scammers can execute on your computer. I think to be very sure, and I know this is painful, you should consider formatting or resetting your device because, to be honest, it's the only way to be sure. If you're unwilling to take that step, I think you can run a full security or antivirus scan just to make sure that there was no other hidden programs running in the background of your device. Next thing you want to do is to probably change all your passwords, including your computer login details, because he could have easily monitored what you were doing when he had remote access to your computer. And you should also inform the organizations of which you have reviewed the details to the scammers too, especially your online banking account services. And you should also report the incident to your bank to halt further activities. And of course, report the matter to the police as well as CSA. So I think it goes without saying that no telecommunications service provider or government agency will request for your personal details or request for access to your online banking account over the phone or through automated voice machines or ask for payment for services rendered.
Okay, Willis, recently, even the cybersecurity agency's website was spoofed. What were the scammers trying to achieve, and why won't the CSA use this kind of method to reach out to the public?
I think this is a variation of the tech support scam that we've been seeing recently. So, in spoofing CSA, of course, the scammers are hoping to give themselves a veneer of legitimacy or an authority when reaching out to their targets. And since they probably know that CSA is the national lead for cybersecurity, they would concoct a number of excuses for you to surrender up your information. For instance, hackers have managed to penetrate your system, and that we will need your login details, to help us complete our investigations. The spoof website is really to facilitate their access in collecting your information. Like I mentioned earlier, they could send you a fake verification email, especially if they already know what your email address is. And it could be a variation of a csa.gov.sg. So it's absolutely important for you to check the sender's email address before responding to them. But once you click on the link to get to the fake website, whether it's CSA or any other government agency, it will be the same story all over again. There will be certain fields for you to input data, and through that, the scammer can then construct further phishing attempts to get more information out of you or gain access to your systems.
So Willis, what is the value on personal data online? Is there a dollar value to, let's say, a username or an email address?
Thanks, David. I think that's really a very interesting question. I think CSA is aware that there are a number of individuals on particular underground forums who are purportedly selling information stolen from data breaches against organizations in Singapore. Now, some trends we notice about these databases that are put up for sale. So the individuals that are selling them would usually ask for payment in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin most of the time, and they would usually ask for anything ranging from a few $100s to tens of thousands of dollars for databases containing anything up to a few hundred names to tens of thousands of names. Now, the information in such databases is usually very patchy. They could consist of names. They could consist of a other personally identifiable information like PII for short. But the entire premise behind selling such databases is to enable other cyber criminals to carry out phishing attacks or like other scams against the victims whose information had been leaked. But one thing that we also notice is that sometimes the databases that are being sold are not legitimate. They could be information that is recycled from previous data breaches and had been like really just proliferating online for up to a decade by now. They could also be like fake details that the scammer purport has constructed or like come up with himself, or they could consist of like information that is already publicly known, such as that's being derived from like the social media web pages and things that they have just scraped off by just scouring the open internet.
Okay, Willis, so it seems like scams are here to stay. What can each of us do to make sure that we don't get scammed?
Well, Andre, I think you're absolutely right. I think scams are here to stay. As a matter of fact, they might even get worse given how interconnected the world is nowadays. When people think that they will not be victims of scams, I think it's a very dangerous mindset to adopt because given how interconnected the world has become, there is really no place, there is really no address, or there is really no number that cyber criminals or scammers cannot reach. So at the end of the day, I think we should always maintain a healthy skepticism. And that's not to say that we become paranoid and we become withdrawn and we don't take part in any online activities at all. But I think the important thing is to have like a questioning mindset. Is this deal really too good to be true? Is this particular situation that's being presented to me, does it sound right? Does it sound genuine? So scammers and cyber criminals really depend on just this moment of inattentiveness or carelessness from us. So when you're in doubt, always consult with friends, family members, or colleagues, people around you. Now, other good practices include not sharing our passwords and other personal information with other people, and not to be enticed by incredible offers that just seem too good to be true. Cybercriminals are always coming up with increasingly convincing methods of phishing, so we must also build up our instincts in the digital space. We don't cross roads without looking left and right for oncoming traffic. So similarly, in the digital world, we should also apply the equivalent instinct of being aware of the risks and learning to spot the signs of phishing.
Thank you, Willis, for being on the show.
Thank you, everybody, for having me on.
That's a wrap for Stop Scams, a new podcast series by The Straits Times. I'm Andre Yeo.
I'm David Sun.
And I'm Jessie Lim.
Once again, don't forget to share this podcast episode with your friends and family. If you'd like to read our Stop Scams articles, there's a link in our podcast text description below.